Speaking of these accidents, for the last few years, the Sean Roden, heart attack, right?
Yeah.
Cedric McMillan, heart attack. What do you think is going on? Why? They're in their 40s, not even 50s. And the old school guys, 70, 80 years old, they're alive, they're good.
My theory is this: back in the days, and I've talked to many of the guys from that era, from Frank Zane to Arnold, Samir, all those guys, they all had an off season. You know, they would train like crazy those 6, 8, maybe 10 weeks before a show. After that, they didn't even want to see the gym. They just ate normally, and they were like almost sick of bodybuilding, you know. Yeah. So they just ate what they wanted, and they got off the gear. Whereas now I think there's more pressure to be always relatively in shape.
Because of Instagram, because of sponsorship and etc.
You got to keep up your persona. If they don't see you online, like, oh, what happened to him? He disappeared. Where is he? And if you're going to be showing yourself, you have to look good. So I think there's more pressure on the guys now, which is unfortunate. Whereas back in the day, we had magazines. Magazines came out every 30 days, you know, and they would publish photos that they shot 6 months, maybe a year before. So you don't always have to be on. And, you know, guys like Arnold, Frank Zane, Columbo, they all took as many photographs as they could.
At their peak level?
Exactly. And that would last Joe Weider a year, 2 years, maybe 3, you know, even longer. So that was the key. They would never want to really get photographed, you know, in the off season. And they just took all the photos as much as they could before the show. And that's what they used for their publicity, which is kind of smart. It gives you more longevity, you know.
And those guys were never that heavy. They never reached 300 pounds. Well,
no.
Lou Ferrigno
maybe
was the biggest. He was huge.
Yeah. No, they never got that heavy. Well, there was no concept of eating every hour or two back then. It was 3, 4, maybe 5 meals. But it wasn't. They would never walk around with Tupperware and egg whites and chicken breasts. And it was absurd, right? They'd go to eat. They'd eat like a horse. But an hour and a half later, they wouldn't have another meal, you know. So that concept of constantly force feeding, I think came around in like 1985, maybe early 80s, you know. There was new science out there saying, oh, you have to force feed your muscles all the time, just continuously provide them with, you know, all the carbohydrates, fats, and protein to build, which worked, because then, you know, the physiques got to a whole other level when you have that many nutrients always in your bloodstream, but your digestive system is always working. It never stops.
For 30 years.
Yeah, so that has to take a toll. So in a way, it's similar to obesity for the heart. Maybe worse, because if you're obese and you have a huge amount of fat, the heart doesn't really have to give that much blood flow to the fat. The fat's there, it's an energy storage. Whereas if it's pecs, if it's biceps, if it's real muscle, nutrients have to be there. There's veins in there, there's capillaries going back and forth. So that has to be fed. So the heart is always pumping. It's always has to feed that tissue. It's live tissue. So that's an extra burden on the heart, you know. But it's funny, I was thinking about this the other day, that all these weird theories of how bodybuilding it could be unhealthy in the 70s, and we didn't believe it, actually became true. Like when GH first came out, it was called STH, somatotropic hormone. I remember just reading medical journals, because the bodybuilding world didn't know about it yet. There was a couple biologists in the gym in Italy who were studying this, like, oh, this makes you bigger, it makes you lean. Like, yeah, but look, side effects are your intestines grow because your intestines have, and several internal organs have more receptors to GH. Yeah. So you don't want to take it. You know, you're better off taking an anabolic steroid with low androgenic properties than GH, because your intestines will grow and might continue to grow even when you stop, and they don't shrink. Whereas if you put on muscle mass on your skeleton, it'll shrink, you know, when you stop. So you're going to get, you know, just big bloated intestines, and you don't want that. So nobody really started using it for many years, because we knew that the side effects were so severe that it wasn't really intelligent to use for bodybuilding. But then later on, it just caught on because it burned fat. It did add some muscle, but, you know, then we see all the big bellies that came out in those years. A little less now, I think. I think there's less usage now. But for a while, it was really, really bad.
But who was the pioneer of the GH and the insulin? The Dorian Yates? The 90s?
What do you mean by pioneer?
Who was the pioneer who got the biggest on the stage? Because I believe before the Dorian, Lee Haney, he was not that big. The Dorian was huge. Then was Ronnie, Jay Cutler.
When Lee Haney was
Phil.
competing, I don't remember seeing a lot of GH or any pros or even amateurs talking about GH. I can't speculate on what they took. It became more popular. When did Haney stop competing? 80, 89?
Late 80s, yeah.
84, he won the first one. So, yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Dorian
Because by 93,
92,
Dorian won
93,
first, right?
Something, yeah.
Yeah, I should know that I was there. The Olympians kind of blend in after a while. And there's no poster child for who popularized GH. That would be unkind to pin that on anybody. But those years, that's when it became more readily available and the price dropped quite a bit. So more and more people were using it. Just amateurs were using it, you know. I think that was a big downfall for bodybuilding, you know.
What do you think is worse, the GH or the insulin?
Well, most of the time they took it together. You know, it was
That's
testosterone, GH, and insulin together gave you the most results. Insulin, I remember a lot of friends who took it, their gut just really got bigger with the GH and insulin together. That was guaranteed big belly. It was just not a good combination. Insulin, you can die from it, you know, so you have to be really, really know exactly what you're doing scientifically to not die and get results. That can happen, but what are the chances of everybody being an expert on what they're injecting? There are guys that are still like in a coma now because they thought it was like testosterone. Oh, after my workout, take a shot of insulin. You know, one guy went to sleep. He never woke up.
Yeah.
You know, it's happened just here in Los Angeles quite a few times. You know, so that's the risk that you take when you start dabbling with these things without being educated about them, you know, so.
If you like this short clip, you are more than welcome to watch the full episode on my other YouTube channel called Apollo the Original.